Losing a loved one can be a shattering experience for anyone, and the pain can manifest in ways that are hard to fathom. This was certainly the case for Helen Moore, who was left reeling after the sudden and tragic death of her 14-month-old baby brother Andrew due to sudden infant death syndrome while left in her care. The weight of guilt and responsibility that came crashing down on Helen was overwhelming. She found it difficult to come to terms with the loss. To cope with the emotional turmoil, Helen started babysitting for friends and family as a means of surrounding herself with children and possibly finding solace in their company. At first glance, her actions seemed well-intentioned, and everyone around her believed that she was simply trying to deal with her grief. However, it was soon revealed that Helen had a much darker motive in mind. She had a deep desire for revenge that gnawed away at her insides, fueled by the pain of losing her brother, and she had concocted a twisted plan for vengeance that would take her down a path from which she would never return. Helen Patricia Moore's upbringing in Fulwood Place, a suburb in Sydney, Australia, was anything but ordinary. Growing up in the 1960s and 70s, Helen was described as a quiet girl who struggled to make friends and was not very expressive about her emotions. However, her mother, Jessie Moore, knew that there was something more going on with her daughter than just shyness and introversion. From as early as 18 months, Helen's behavior began to raise alarm bells. Her mother recalls that she was self-destructive, often destroying her possessions and lashing out in violent ways toward others. Despite Jessie's concerns, no one seemed to believe her when she insisted that her daughter had a mental problem. Things came to a head when Helen was 13 years old and had a violent altercation with one of her brothers. She pulled out a great handful of his hair, leaving her mother worried and at a loss for what to do. When she took Helen to see a doctor, he dismissed her concerns.
He spoke to Helen and me, patted Helen on the head and said she was quite normal, and prescribed Valium for me. After that, I thought maybe it was me who was neurotic.
Helen's behavior continued to fluctuate between moments of being the ideal daughter and being an uncontrollable monster. Her mother learned to anticipate when her daughter was about to enter a bad mood, but even she couldn't have predicted the devastating turn that Helen's life would take. In 1978, when Helen was 16 years old, her first boyfriend broke up with her, sending her into a tailspin of grief and heartache. Just 1 week later, her 14-month-old half-brother Andrew was found dead in his bed, the victim of sudden infant death syndrome, also known as SIDS, a natural and unexplainable phenomenon that can occur in infants. For Helen, this was the final straw, and what followed was a series of events that would shock and horrify those who knew her best. Helen, still reeling from the loss of her baby brother Andrew just 2 months prior, decided to start a babysitting service. She posted flyers at the Claymore Information Service, where she volunteered her time. To her surprise, Helen received a flood of inquiries from parents in need of a trustworthy caregiver for their young children. In May of that year, she accepted her first job, babysitting her 16-month-old baby cousin Suzanne. But what started as a seemingly innocent job quickly turned into a horrifying tragedy. The innocent child's life was about to be cut tragically short. Once alone with the baby girl, something snapped inside Helen. She began to suffocate her baby cousin until her life was drained from her tiny body. When the authorities arrived and examined the body, they found no signs of foul play. It was determined that baby Suzanne's death was due to SIDS, the same fate her little brother had just succumbed to. Jessie, Helen's mother, feared that her daughter may have unknowingly caused the death by accident. She decided to question Helen about it.
I asked Helen if she had anything to do with the death. She hysterically denied it.
Little did her mother know that this was just the beginning of a nightmarish descent into darkness. This incident marked a turning point for Helen, a twisted realization that she could get away with murder undetected. This realization sent shivers down her spine, but also a dangerous thrill that consumed her beyond belief. With each subsequent murder, Helen became more and more confident in her ability to outsmart everyone and feed her insatiable desire for bloodshed. 8 months later, in January of 1980, Helen had taken on another babysitting job. This time, she was entrusted with the care of 12-month-old Nicholas Vaughn. As baby Vaughn lay sleeping, Moore quietly moved in to carry out her nefarious plan. In a moment of pure evil, she attempted to smother the life of an innocent child, and having thought her mission was accomplished, she calmly went back to watching TV. But fate had other plans, and the baby boy suddenly started crying. Surprisingly, Helen called for an ambulance. Thankfully, he made a full recovery. Helen's mother was understandably distraught and overwhelmed with suspicion. Memories of Suzanne's death came flooding back, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Helen might have been involved.
I thought, oh my God, she's done something. I screamed at her, but she replied, I was always ready to blame her when something went wrong. Then the experts said Vaughn had suffered a convulsion, and I apologized to Helen.
Helen was able to escape the consequence of her action. Helen continued to receive job offers from unsuspecting families. On February 1st, 1980, she was entrusted with the care of 2-year-old Aaron Crocker. Once again, Helen would unleash her deadly attack. As before, she waited patiently until the child was sound asleep in his bed, and then placed her hands over the child's tiny mouth and nose, attempting to suffocate him. Surprisingly, Helen's attempt was unsuccessful. Little Aaron was alive. He was quickly rushed to Liverpool Hospital, where he was in a deep coma for 2 weeks, before being transferred to the Prince of Wales Hospital for a further 6 weeks. He survived, but his once bright future was shattered. Helen's attack had left him blind and crippled, a shadow of his former self. However, years later, he would succumb to the injuries inflicted upon him by Helen. With growing suspicion weighing heavy on her heart, Helen's mother, Jessie, detailed,
I shook her. I was sure she had done it. Helen ran crying to her room. We prayed it would be something other than Helen's hand that had hurt Aaron.
Helen's unrelenting thirst for murder was unquenchable. Just a few weeks later, on February 24th, 1980, another child died while under Helen's care. 2-year-old Rachel Hayes' tragic death was shrouded in mystery, and despite a growing body count, no one suspected Helen to be the cause. The evening of the tragedy, a police officer brought Helen home and explained the devastating news of baby Rachel's passing to her unsuspecting parents. The officer assured them it was no fault of Helen's. Shockingly, Helen insisted on attending the little girl's funeral, a twisted show of her feigned innocence and callous disregard for the tragedy she had caused. But at last, the curtains would finally close on Helen's twisted killing spree. In March of 1980, Helen was babysitting her half-brother Peter. But like a monster lurking in the shadows, she waited for the perfect moment to strike. While Peter was innocently watching television, Helen crept up behind him and placed her hands over his nose and mouth, attempting to end his young life. But Peter fought back with all his might, struggling to break free from his own sister's deadly grip. He tried to run to the front door, but Helen chased him down and captured him again. With a cold determination, she forced him to the ground and held him there for 3 long minutes, waiting until she was sure he was dead. And then, as if nothing had happened, she calmly went upstairs and took a shower before calling her mother. Jessie Moore had returned home to a nightmare. Her son lay lifeless at the bottom of the stairs. Something wasn't right, and Jessie knew it. Her suspicions grew as they headed to the police station to report the incident.
We were driving in a police car to Campbelltown Police Station after identifying Peter's body. I was in the back seat with Helen. I looked down at her hands and saw the scratches, and finally, I knew she had done it. She had killed them.
As the questioning went on, what she revealed was even more horrifying than Jesse could have imagined. While being questioned by authorities, Helen admitted to killing children for years, suffocating them in their sleep with her bare hands. When asked why, she simply replied, "I wanted to kill them." As the truth came out, the full horror of Helen's actions became clear. Her mother's worst nightmare had come true, and she realized that she had been living with a monster for 18 years. Helen's descent into darkness was a chilling reminder that evil can reside in anyone, regardless of age or upbringing. For Jessie Moore, there could be no solace or closure. The realization that her daughter had been capable of such unspeakable acts had been a crushing blow. After years of living with Helen's unbalanced mind, the truth had finally come to light, and with it came the sickening knowledge that she had been facing the terrible truth for so long, and now, finally, she knew. Helen's fate was sealed when she was handed a prison sentence for the unspeakable horrors she had committed. But even behind bars, the darkness she had unleashed upon the world continued to cast a shadow over the community. Her twisted tale of murder and mayhem had sent shockwaves through the town, leaving everyone who heard it with a gut-wrenching sense of unease.